Today we're going to be reviewing the documents we received from the GSPS Freedom of Information request. It's basically my personal file because everything else we requested was denied. We requested Officer Weber's employee file, that was denied. We requested a 911 call in an incident, and that was denied. But they did send us over 200 pages from our file. Now they are heavily redacted. There's a lot of pages that are just a grayed out block. There's nothing to be read. So we won't actually have to read through 200 pages. But there's quite a few incidents, and you guys can let us know in the comments if you think that this was appropriately redacted or if the public should have information or access to more information. This little dude is Dexter. He's a young gargle gecko, and he's gonna hang out with us while we go through all of these documents.
So this one here is the first ever report we made to the GSPS. So it's the first time ever we dealt with that Greater Sudbury Police Services. And I'm not quite sure why this one is so heavily redacted, because it involves me. It's a report that I made. We at the time had our newborn son, and we lived in a 3-bedroom big apartment. So we rented out one of the rooms to someone we found online. So we had no previous relationship with him. And it didn't take long for us to realize that he liked to burn rocks. I guess that's the best way I could put it without getting censored by YouTube. And then that escalated one day. I mean, it wasn't just one day. He had started having temper tantrums and freaking out in his room, but that was like concealed to his room. He was basically like a gamer, so he'd be playing it out, then he'd have full-on freakouts and start throwing stuff. But one day it started getting really aggressive, and he was freaking out in the house, not just in the room. So we asked him to calm down. Then he turned his attention to us. He kept saying this thing where he's like, "That's right, I'm a terrorist. Everyone I live with is terrorized." And it's like, it was being almost sarcastic, but he was almost like making or feeling bad for himself, saying that the way he acts always terrorizes everyone around him. So we ended up calling the GSPS that night, but they never showed. So the next morning I called the GSPS again, and then this time they showed. And it was really over quickly, because they showed up and realized that there was already a warrant out for this guy's arrest. So they basically just showed up, cuffed him, and then took him away. I honestly had forgotten about this entire thing, and I can't even remember the guy's name, which is not anywhere to be found in this report. I do remember that he went by the nickname Goat, and I believe his last name was Gautier. That's why he went by that gamer name Goat, except he would use it in real life too. So like when we first met him, he was like, "Hey, I'm Goat." And that's all I remember about this guy. But it was an interesting situation. This one here, I really don't know what it's about, because they didn't give us any information at the time either. It's heavily redacted, and that makes sense because it's not anything that has to do with me. It's basically a report that was made by someone else about something else, and they ended up knocking on our door asking if we knew about it, and we said we don't know anything about it. So the only things that are not redacted here are basically 2 paragraphs, which just say that at a certain time they showed up in the co-op complex where we were. I guess that's where it happened. And they knocked on units 2 to 38, as well as 92 and 94. So we were included in those. And because of that, this entire thing here made it into my file.
This next one is just a 1-page report, no officer notes or anything. And it's back from when I was head of security at Collège Boreal. There was a dog that was basically living in a car outside midsummer, scorching hot. So we were forced to report it, and ultimately animal control came in and took the dog.
Another one here from when I was security at Collège Boreal. This one, the police came in saying that an incident had occurred and they wanted us to check our cameras to see if the incident was on camera. Unfortunately, it happened pretty far back in the parking lots. So we were able to like identify the vehicle they were looking for. We saw it come in and out, but there was absolutely nothing else to be seen. Here's another one from Collège Boreal. I'm not surprised that these early ones are all from when I was working security. This was a domestic situation, and a boyfriend girlfriend showed up. They literally have nothing to do with the college. The girl just got off at a nearby bus stop and basically came into the college for help. So we separated them and called the police. This one is another security one, but while I was working at the Colson nightclub, basically we kicked some people out. They started fighting. Other patrons jumped in. This was all on the sidewalk now, and it just basically became a bunch of chaos, and one dude got injured. But it legitimately, like, we did not beat him. It had nothing to do with us. This guy was just on the bottom of the pile with other bodies falling on top of him, and when the chaos stopped, this dude was hurt, and it caused the big thing. There was probably like 10 officers there. There's actually 17 pictures of officer notes for this one, all of them redacted completely. You just see a notepad with a gray block. There's nothing to be read on them. Another bar fight here. What I find interesting about these ones is that they've been redacting all of the details and all of the names of the patrons involved, but they've been releasing the names of the other security guards. And now we are licensed security guards, so that could be why. But they've also been releasing Paul's name on this report and the last report. Paul is the owner, or was the owner of the nightclub at that time. Another bar fight here. If anyone's wondering why the police actually show up to these, it's because we call the police ourselves. So if a situation gets out of hand and somebody actually gets hurt, we call the police in. We have a police report made. It covers ourselves. That way they don't come back the next day. This is another of the reports that I don't know much about. I mean, I have an idea of what the story was. Apparently, someone called in a breaking and enter in progress. And for some reason, we were seen as suspects. So the police showed up and talked to us, but we had nothing to do with it. It does, however, seem that they never actually looked for another suspect. This was just a report where I got punched in the face and then I called the police, but decided I didn't want to make the report. I honestly have no idea what this one's about, and it also is marked as a duplicate occurrence, but there's no original. This one here was one of the more interesting bar fight situations we were in. It was actually at the Gold, which is a strip club, or was a strip club. I worked there until it closed. And we didn't have much fights there. It was a very different atmosphere. Usually people left when we asked them to leave, but in this case, this guy was very intoxicated. And not only did he keep like searching his pockets like he was trying to take a knife out, he told us he had a knife. So I wasn't taking any chances. When he didn't want to stop fighting, I put him to sleep. And it's not the first time I put someone to sleep in the bar. It's the quickest way to stop someone who's really out of control and hurting other people. And typically that ends it. Right? They wake up head ringing, but they're not hurt, and they usually understand that it's game over. They stop. But this guy didn't. He got up. He was clearly intoxicated still and disoriented, looking around for a hat. And then he busts out the knife. Now again, it's not the first time someone produces a knife. We're not that unfamiliar with the situation. So at that point, it's keep your distance. There's no reason to approach this guy. Just keep your distance. We try to surround him. We basically just try to force him to leave. Now, while we're doing this, though, another drunk patron comes out. This guy was a friend. We knew him, so he wanted to help us. But, like he had this attitude where he's like, buddy, you don't need to do this. And he like walked up to the guy holding the knife as if he wanted to hug him. And that guy basically stabbed him. It was a stabbing, but he had a very short blade. It was a hesitant stab. So basically it was a very minor wound. He only needed a few stitches. It was nothing serious. But he did get stabbed because he tried to hug the guy who was holding the knife. That's just ridiculous. I'm not sure why this one here was classified kidnapping. It's the first time I see this one. Now, I guess I don't know what occurred before my involvement, but essentially this is a situation with someone I was seeing who had a psycho ex-boyfriend. He was basically stalking us, confronted us in the Walmart, confronted me at the Gold once, which was a bar I was working at, and wanted me to go outside with him. But yeah, this was a crazy situation. So this one is one of the reports that sets up a wrongful harassment charge that I got. And this is one of those situations where I really started to see just how incompetent and stubborn these officers are, and how their reports and notes really don't match up with reality. But in this situation here, I had been assaulted again by my son's mother, the same girl that I reported before. This time, however, it was in public during a custody exchange. She ripped open my car door and started hitting me. She didn't want me to leave with my son. So she was arrested with the assault and then released under conditions not to communicate with me. But we had a court date shortly after this, and the family court was not in agreement with this. They basically said that the OPP didn't look at the situation properly and shouldn't have put these conditions in place. So now we had a family court order telling us that we could communicate for matters of. Not long after this, the charges were actually withdrawn. She didn't want to take a plea agreement, and I didn't want to pursue criminal charges. So the Crown Attorney withdrew them, saying there was no benefit to the public in pursuing the charges. But then another incident occurred where she was again withholding my son and cut off communications. But this time there's no conditions in place. The conditions have been removed. The charges are withdrawn. And I called the GSPS for essentially a welfare check. I wanted them to go make sure my son was okay and to tell her that she's violating the court order and needs to communicate with me. This escalated into the police charging her for violating her release conditions, which no longer existed, and at the same time charging me with harassment. Now, her charges were immediately withdrawn as soon as they figured out that she didn't have any conditions, but mine weren't. I had to communicate with the Crown Attorney. I presented my case. The Crown Attorney agreed to withdraw the charges, but told me that he couldn't withdraw the charges until I went into the station and got processed. Because basically, until I went in, got fingerprint and processed, the charges were not actually laid, so the Crown Attorney couldn't withdraw them. So I went in, and you could see in one of these reports here, the officer says, as I was going in for fingerprinting, he didn't handcuff me because the Crown Attorney told him not to handcuff me. I told him I wouldn't turn myself in if they were going to cuff me. So they agreed not to handcuff me. And then he quotes that I stated, "This isn't going to court." They laughed at me. They didn't believe me. But the fact is the charges were already withdrawn. It was just procedure. I had to get fingerprinted. Then I get fingerprinted, I get charged, I receive the letter in the mail showing that they're withdrawing the charges. But I still show up to the first appearance just to make sure everything goes smooth. And when I get there, it's an assistant crown attorney, a female that's prosecuting this. And she was actually still trying to prosecute. So she never got the notice and she was trying to prosecute. And the judge had to interrupt her when she was going through the facts and say, I have a notice here saying these charges are being withdrawn. And the assistant crown attorney said she had no knowledge of that. And then I held up the same notice and put it in front of the camera and showed that I also had this notice showing they were withdrawn. So the assistant crown attorney actually tried to have this like adjourned so that she could figure out what's going on, but the judge wasn't having that and he withdrew the charges right away.
This one is the last report on my file with the GSPS, and it is the reason I started auditing. Everything you're going to read in here, from the arrest report to the notes to everything, is majorly a fiction. So I showed up at the Walmart. I was traveling from out of town, right? I'm from Chapleau. I was in Sudbury at the Walmart, and I had animals with me. I run a rescue education center. I also breed dogs, so I often travel with animals to deliver them, to show them, pick them up, whatever it might be. We're used to this, and I'm very cautious with what I do. I know what I'm doing. I know how fast the van warms up and what they can handle. Anyways, I went into the Walmart for what was about 10 minutes. I literally jogged in, grabbed a few things. There was like 5 items. I even showed my receipt to the officers and ran back out. When I ran out, the officers were at my van. They had just arrived, but they had the slide door open, and they closed it. They closed it on the tail of one of the puppies, actually making him whimper and all that. And then they started talking to me. And then there was a vehicle there that was about to leave. And I asked them, are those the people who reported this? So according to them, yes, those were the people who reported it. And they had called the 911 saying that it had been about 20 to 25 minutes and that they had been out there waiting and they were worried about the dogs. The problem with that is that I saw these people leaving the Walmart as I was going into the Walmart. Okay. And they claimed that they apparently arrived after me. So they parked near my van. They went in the Walmart, did their shopping, came back out, and I was still there. But that's not true at all. I saw these people walk right by me. I saw them look at my dog, the one dog that they could see in the window. And then I saw them go to their vehicle, which is parked directly in front of mine. So their claim makes no sense whatsoever. And that's what the police were basing themselves on. So the police were saying, well, you were 25 minutes. But that's not something they confirmed. That's something they received through the 911 call. And the GSPS refuses to show us the 911 call. So we can't actually even see what was reported. Anyways, when I went back to my car, there were 2 officers on scene. And these 2 guys were actually pretty good. One of them stayed quiet, and one of them talked to me, checked out the dogs. He was actually interested in the dogs and all that. He was interested in my rescue and education center. That guy was cool. But his notes in his report don't reflect that. They don't reflect any of the conversations we had. They don't reflect any of the evidence I showed them. I showed them a chocolate bar that was in my center console that hadn't melted yet. And I mean, here in summer, we go to the corner store and there's chocolate bars melting on the shelves. You know what I mean? So if my chocolate bar didn't melt in the van yet, then the heat in the van was fine. We'd been running the van all day long with the AC blasted. It was like cool in there. And then the one argument I made in court is time matters, right? And if you read these statutes, it says unnecessarily causes harm to an animal. So I asked, who determines what's necessary? Because if you go to a gas station, you have to shut off your car. You put the gas in. Then let's say you go inside to pay. There's a little bit of a lineup. You grab a drink, whatever it is. A normal stop at the gas station could take 5 to 10 minutes. Is that a criminal event? Are you not allowed to turn off your vehicle when there's dogs in your car? And these guys went even exaggerated the temperature. They said it was 30 degrees. It not only was it not 30 degrees even at the hottest point that day, but the heat had broken. The sun was starting to come down. It was cloudy, and it started to rain about 10 minutes after I left. So the temperature was not even that concerning, but they're doing everything to make it justifiable, right? And we see this quite often too, where officers don't sit there with their notepad out taking notes as the incident's occurring. They'll usually deal with you and then they'll write the notes afterwards. So in a situation like this one, these first two officers actually told me I was free to go. So they checked everything out. Everything seemed fine. The dogs were fine. There was no indication that they had suffered any kind of distress. So they radioed cancel tango. And then the one guy who was being cool told me that that meant that they were canceling the call for a supervisor or additional officers and that they were breaking contact and I was free to go. But as this guy was telling me this, a third officer showed up on a motorcycle. And this third officer came up and right away got in my face. He was pointing at me aggressively, shouting like a maniac, telling me I could have killed these dogs, blah, 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 blah. But he didn't even take a second to talk to the other officers or to look at the dogs. You know, he got off his motorcycle and came at me. This is Constable Weber. He's also the arresting officer and the one who made these arrest reports. Now, I did what I usually do. I put him in check. I told him to stop shouting like a maniac and to step back. He checked himself. He looked around, made sure there was no witnesses because we were out in public. And then he went quiet, walked away to his motorcycle, checked something on his computer, came back, asked for my ID. I even bothered to ask, why do you want my ID? Now, Weber didn't say anything to me at all, but one of the officers is like, oh, it's just for identification. The other officer is like, oh, he's just going to look at something and then we're out of here. I'm like, okay. So I gave him my ID. And then he comes back like 2 minutes later while I was talking to the cool cop and says, you're under arrest. So right away, I'm like, what the fuck? And the other cool officer like jumps in front of me, puts himself between me and Weber. And he's like, I'm not too sure what's going on here, but you're not going to get cuffed. You're not going to get brought in. You'll be able to drive back home to Chapleau and then figure this out later. You could fight it in court. But basically, I got charged with 4 counts of animal cruelty. And that's purely retaliatory, okay? There's actually a pause act that regulates these types of things. So leaving your dog in a car on a hot day where maybe he gets dehydrated and suffers minor distress would qualify as unnecessarily allowing an animal to suffer distress. And that's non-criminal. It's in the Pause Act and it's a fine. And if this guy really wanted to move forward with something, that's what he should have been moving forward with. Just a non-criminal fine under the Pause Act. But because I told him to stop shouting like a maniac, to step back, and now he was like embarrassed and maybe saw something on his computer, felt I needed to be punished. So this guy escalated it to 4 counts of animal cruelty, which is way above what this situation warranted. Those 4 counts of animal cruelty were withdrawn on our first appearance because I submitted documents to court before we got there, and the Crown Attorney clearly agreed that there was no grounds for criminal charges here. So first appearance, I show up in court, boom, those criminal charges withdrawn. But you start to look at these things and the notes, the reports, everything that's in there was written after the fact, and it was written purely to justify the charges. They couldn't write the truth. If they would have written the truth, it would have went against the charges and they wouldn't have had grounds for charges. So they had to fabricate the notes and the reports and everything so that they could justify these charges. And even with the fabrications that they made, the Crown Attorney still read through it and was like, there's no criminal grounds here. This is not criminal charges. So this is why we record now. You have to be able to prove everything that happens because their word will always be taken as fact, even when they're out of control. And when we showed up in court and we had presented the documents, the evidence, we said that there were civil rights violation. It was retaliatory against our freedom of speech. And then there was officer misconduct.
And what the court told us is that they can't consider officer misconduct while these charges are being looked at. Officer misconduct is something that's addressed once charges are resolved. So in situations like this where the charges are retaliatory, you can't even use that as a defense. You have to prove that they had no ground for the charges. And I was able to easily do that. So it wasn't a big deal. But these were major charges. And I shouldn't have had to go through the process. That's what they do. The process is the punishment. Even if they know their charges won't stick, they will file the charges and they will force you to go through the process.
Thanks for watching. If you want to send us a story, you can send us an email to nocaudits@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time.